Thank you very much, Rabbi Bacon. That was a little scary to me to hear that introduction. Thank you, Cantor Rodnitsky, and thank you, Rabbi Blake in absentia, for inviting me to speak with you tonight and giving me the opportunity to address this week's Torah portion called Re'eh, which comes from the book of Deuteronomy. It's a long portion containing several different themes. The preamble, as we've heard a little bit, talks of blessings and curses. Blessings to those who obey God's commandments, and curses to those who don't. And I immediately saw what a great portion this would be for someone celebrating a bar bat mitzvah. A 13-year-old, soon-to-be adult, with their whole life in front of them, thinking about the really critical choices about how to live your life, how to make the right choices, how to, as Spike Lee aptly put it, do the right thing. Well, I missed my chance to think about this particular passage at my bar mitzvah. I did celebrate it here at WRT, but sadly, and this, when I thought about it, got me a little bit, maybe the word is freaked out. It was 41 years ago, almost exactly. It was September of 1982 when I read from the Torah right inside the congregation, over the sanctuary over there. So it's a little too late for me to think about this week's Torah portion in terms of looking forward, but it's a great opportunity to think about how some of the things I've experienced and gone through apply to some of the messages in the portion, and to think about some of the things that have already come up in my life. Now, as I noted, there's a lot of material in this week's Torah portion, but there are two themes that jumped out at me as good topics to discuss. In this portion, Moses tells the Israelites that they will live in this new land, enjoy prosperity, and have victory over their enemies. And they are told that God is going to take care of them. The people should expect to be prosperous and have the power that comes with that wealth. It's written, "You will extend loans to many nations, but you will require none yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you." But with this power, with this prosperity, comes responsibility. And those are the two themes I want to discuss briefly tonight: the responsibility of those who have power and the responsibility of those who have prosperity. Now, I recognize in these, I think they're safe to call them turbulent times, I could easily talk about certain recent leaders of our country who consistently seem to act irresponsibly with power and the consequences that have come from those actions. But we read about that every day, and that would be boring for me to talk about. So I'm going to be a little bit more personal and tell about some stories and things that I've experienced that sort of apply to these themes. Now, as you heard, before I joined my current law firm, Wachtell Lipton, I worked as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. And let me say that's the best job ever for a lawyer. And I'll never forget, from the day that I was hired, hearing about the immense power that a federal prosecutor has. The power to help victims reset their lives, the power to decide what crime should be charged against a defendant and what prison sentence to ask for, the power to take a leap of faith and give someone deserving a break, or to not do that. Prosecutors affect lives every day, and they're really young. I was 29 when I got the job as a federal prosecutor, and so you have, at a very young age, this really immense power and the need to exercise it responsibly. And I could tell probably literally hundreds of stories about my time as an AUSA that demonstrate the virtues or the risks or the difficult situations of how to exercise that power responsibly. I'll tell just one. I don't know if it was the best one, but it's the one I thought of. So I worked in a long-term investigation of a loosely organized drug ring. There were about 50 people, and they were all buying kilogram quantities of cocaine from one person. His name was Joseph Sapia. Now, unfortunately for all these people, and really mostly for Mr. Sapia, we had a wiretap on Joe Sapia's phone. And we listened to calls for months, and all day long, people would call up Joe. I need one, I need two, meet me here, meet me there. these didn't seem like particularly violent people, and they certainly weren't very organized. They were sort of all sorts of people who they were needing cocaine so they could sell it. And so they knew who to call. They called Joe. Now, as you can imagine, people in this line of work, they don't call up and say, "Hi, can I please have a kilogram of cocaine? How much will you be charging me?" They talk in code. Meet me at 35th Avenue meant the cost would be $35,000. I need a battery was one word people used. That battery was a kilogram of cocaine. Well, we investigated these really, at least 50, maybe more people who would call all this phone. And there was one person who really stood out. He really seemed to fit the mold. He was a little bit older, and he had just gotten out of prison for a serious crime, and by all appearances was returning to the drug dealing that he had done before to get back on his feet. And we intercepted a call one day in which he said he needed a pair of pants and to meet him on 33rd Street. And so we knew we had him. A kilo of cocaine for $33,000. And so along with all the other people, we went to a grand jury and brought an indictment and had a big takedown and arrested all sorts of people. And then we were going through the process of getting more information about these folks, and I sat down with a very senior person in this group whose name was, well, it wasn't his name. His nickname was Pig. I have another story about him, but Mimi said it's not appropriate for this. It's not like inappropriate. It just doesn't fit the themes. But I'll tell that story later. Well, I sat down with Pig, and we went over the whole list of people, and we were going through the various people and where they sold drugs and what they did, and I came to the pants guy, and he said, "Well, he's not a drug dealer. He just got out of prison." I said, "Wait a minute, Pig. Look at this call, a pair of pants on 33rd Street. He said, "Well, yeah, he actually needed a pair of pants." And we met him at 33rd Street, and they gave it to him. He was just trying to get on his feet. I said, "Wow. It's not what I was expecting to hear from Pig that day." Now, this person's fate was in my hands. This was just a cooperating witness. Pig was no angel. And we had other evidence, and I could have just sort of left it to the jury and sort of just proceeded with the case. I had that power, but that seemed wrong. That would not have been a responsible exercise of power, and so we dismissed the charges. And that was actually as good as I had ever felt as a prosecutor, because we made a mistake, we recognized it, and we moved on. Now, the second theme that I want to talk about is directed to those who are prosperous and the responsibility that entails. Now, as I noted, this week's Torah portion, in this week's portion, Moses tells the Israelites that they will be prosperous. But chapter 15 recognizes that there will also be those that are needy. God commands us to open your hand to the poor and needy in your land. If there is a needy person among you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against them. Open your hand and give whatever is sufficient to meet the need. And so the instruction from that portion seems obvious and seems easy, certainly to all of us in this room who are coming out to Friday night services. But as you might imagine, in other walks of life, people don't always make those choices. And as life unfolds, people make decisions that sometimes we wish they wouldn't have made. I'll just give one more brief example from my days as a prosecutor where I witnessed somebody who was in a position of power and prosperity who didn't make the right choice. As you heard, I worked on the investigation and prosecution from the fraud at WorldCom, and the central figure in that case was a man named Bernie Ebbers. Ebbers was the personification of power and being prosperous. He was on the cover of magazines. He was labeled the telecom cowboy. He was really larger than life as his company had one acquisition after another. But he did not heed the words that I just read, and he did not exercise his power and prosperity responsibly. And it ultimately led to his downfall, and I was the prosecutor at his trial and saw firsthand what had happened. And then really sadly, he was convicted of several crimes and ended up serving just about the rest of his life in prison. So the lesson of being responsible when prosperous, while sort of seemingly easy, isn't easy. And it's really something we all need to think about because it takes effort and it takes focus, and it's something you need to really concentrate on and do. Now, one other comment about this week's portion it doesn't really take the macro view. It's very easy sometimes to think sort of, I'll say, think big, make a single big donation to a charity or a foundation and think you've sort of done your job. And don't misunderstand, that's good, and we should all do that too. But this portion really tells us that that's not really enough. You should really think about your community. And it's okay to think small. That is, like, look local, look at to the people around you. Think about your community, do little things, show up, help those around you. Little things that help our community really are often way more important than some big donation or something else. It's just really helping people around you is really a really important message, I think, that comes from this week's portion. So those are some of the few great lessons from this week's portion. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have thought about them and to have shared some of the thoughts with you. So Shabbat Shalom.